Thanks to Brilliant for supporting this episode of SciShow. Go to brilliant.org/SciShow to check out their Logic course and for 20% off an annual premium subscription. During the COVID-19 pandemic, vaccines have been at the forefront of most people's minds. But you might have some lingering questions, and luckily, some scientists know vaccines inside and out. Literally. So to answer some of your burning questions without putting you through a half an hour of discussing the traumatizing pandemic, here is a non-COVID vaccine special. Starting with a very important question: are you still vaccinated, even in the incredibly unlikely event that your arm falls off after the jab?
Imagine that you just got your COVID-19 shot and afterward you're just chilling in a cantina in Mos Eisley and a Jedi comes along and cuts off your arm. Your immediate question, of course, is whether you just lost immunity from the vaccine along with your arm. Surprisingly, the answer is probably not. And the reason has to do with why vaccines are typically injected into your arm. The goal of a vaccine is to safely teach your immune system to recognize bits of a pathogen so it can recognize the full-blown pathogen later. These bits can be stuff like pieces of the particular germ or the genetic instructions for those pieces which your cells end up making. When you get a vaccine, the immune response starts at the injection site, which is why some of us get a sore arm afterward. So you might think all the immunity action happens at that spot. But actually, vaccines start traveling around your body within minutes. See, vaccines are injected into your arm muscle because skeletal muscle is highly vascularized, meaning it has lots of blood vessels. So anything injected into your muscles moves into your blood quickly. From there, it circulates around your body, picking up speed as it rushes from the tiny capillaries to the larger veins and eventually through your heart. In addition, once it's in a muscle, the vaccine drains into the lymphatic vessels. It then flows into your lymph nodes where immune cells learn to recognize the germ and start making antibodies that defend your body from the pathogen. And these systems work within minutes. In 1997, researchers injected mice with a vaccine in their leg muscle, then surgically removed that muscle. The mice developed a normal immune response even if their muscle was removed just 10 minutes after vaccination, or even less. Apparently, it moved fast. But if muscle shots are so great, why not inject vaccines into even bigger muscles, like your glutes? Actually, health officials once thought vaccinating people's butts was a good idea, but they eventually realized backsides have downsides. Like, a 2006 study found that only 32% of buttocks injections hit muscle. Most went into the fat, which doesn't contain many blood vessels. So, best case scenario, the vaccine needs more time to exit your rear end. In fact, if the injection doesn't hit muscle, your vaccine could fail entirely, or cause unpleasant side effects. So technique matters even for an arm injection, since people have varying amounts of fat in their arms. That means health practitioners might have to use different sized needles to make sure they hit their muscular target. Assuming everything goes well, if you got your vaccine and it's been 10 minutes, you could hypothetically lose your arm in a freak encounter with a Jedi and still be immunized, but I wouldn't test it.
I'm so happy that the conclusion of those early experiments was don't stab people in the butt. It is so much easier to go from work to a vaccination appointment wearing a t-shirt than wearing chaps. But either way, there is a needle involved in the whole operation. So why doesn't it hurt every time?
You've probably gotten a lot of shots in your lifetime. The ones you probably freaked out over as a baby all the way up to your last flu vaccine. Either way, you might remember some shots being nastier than others. Like, some aren't that bad at all, hardly more than a pinch, but others hurt like no one's business and can make your arm sore for days afterwards. In general, a little pain after a shot isn't a bad thing. It just means your body is learning to recognize and fight off a pathogen, like the flu virus, so that you don't get really sick if it shows up again. But it doesn't mean that the pain is, well, any less of a pain. How much a shot hurts depends on a lot of things, including where you get jabbed, what's in the vaccine, and of course, your personal feeling about needles. You might think that a bigger needle and a deeper shot would hurt more, but in most cases, those deeper injections into muscle, or what doctors call intramuscular shots, actually pose less of a problem than the ones given just under the skin. Scientists aren't totally sure why this is, but they think part of it has to do with the way that each tissue absorbs fluid. If you inject a bunch of fluid into fatty skin, it doesn't have much of a place to go and can get trapped, which can be painful. Muscles, meanwhile, are full of blood vessels and can clear out the liquid much more quickly, so they tend to cause less pain, swelling, and redness. As a bonus, muscles also tend to have a better mix of immune cells, so intramuscular shots are often more effective. Besides where the shot is given, how much a shot hurts also depends on what's in it. Some vaccines contain adjuvants, which are materials added to vaccines to make it easier for your immune system to recognize the pathogen you want to avoid. They're inflammatory and made of things like aluminum or small parts of bacteria. They're harmless, but since they aren't normally found in your body, adjuvants cause more immune cells to come to the scene of the injection to check out what's there, and to begin processing it. It turns out that some of the more painful vaccines, including those that protect against tetanus or the human papillomavirus, also called HPV, tend to have adjuvants in them. And in the case of HPV, the version of the vaccine that patients report as being more painful actually has 2 adjuvants in it. If that sounds terrible, remember, they're there because they make the vaccine work better. In fact, so far, it looks like the double adjuvant vaccine might help people have stronger and longer lasting protection. Scientists are still working on making vaccines less painful, but for now, it's no pain, no gain, as they say. Although, of course, if you have severe pain after a shot, or if it's lasting a long time, you should consult your doctor. We are definitely no substitute for professional medical advice.
Okay, so maybe it doesn't work this way for every vaccine, but it's nice to know that at least for some of them, when it hurts more, it's just working better. But every vaccine is different, and that's in more ways than just how they make you feel. Like, you need to get some of them every year, but you're done with others as a baby. Here is why.
The number of diseases we've beaten back using vaccines is truly impressive. But when it comes to beating back viruses themselves, our track record is actually a lot less consistent. Take measles. It's a severe, highly contagious disease that used to be considered an inevitable part of childhood until vaccination was introduced in 1963. The measles vaccine saves millions of lives, and according to the CDC, 2 doses is usually enough to protect kids for life. Influenza is a nasty bug too. But unlike measles, which is known as the poster child for lifelong immunity, influenza is the only vaccine-preventable disease that requires a fresh shot every year. Come on, flu, why can't you be more like measles and let us fight you off with just a couple doses? What makes these 2 viruses so different that we can fend off one of them permanently in 1 or 2 steps, while the other requires constant vigilance? It has to do in part with the structure of these viruses and how mutation causes them to change. The measles virus is shaped kind of like a ball covered in spikes, and those spikes are proteins, named hemagglutinin and fusion proteins, or H and F for short, which help the virus latch on a host cell and infect it. And if H or F undergo a genetic mutation, the measles virus suddenly gets much worse at infecting. Researchers are still studying the details of how this works in measles, but the genetic sequence of the virus determines the structure of those proteins. And if that structure changes even a tiny bit in measles, they appear to stop working. The point of any vaccine is to trigger the immune system to create antibodies to specific disease-causing agents, which then lie in wait to fend off microbes with the same antigen if and when they invade the body in the future. And in measles, these H and F proteins can't change, which is pretty great for us because we just need to produce 1 vaccine and that'll pretty much work for everyone forever. In fact, the vaccine we use today was developed using a strain of measles that was first isolated from a young boy in 1954, and it still works really well. Because measles today looks enough like measles from 1954 that the same antibodies still work to fend off the illness. Influenza viruses, on the other hand, are the quick change artists of the viral world. Like measles, the types of influenza our vaccines target have 2 kinds of protein spikes. Hemagglutinin, or HA, helps the virus bind to the host cell. There's also neuraminidase, or NA, which helps release viruses from the host cell. HA and NA together make up the HN formula we named flu strains after, like H1N1. But unlike its counterpart in the measles virus, HA mutates a lot. Mutations change the shape of this protein, and it changes so quickly that an antibody that worked for one subtype of flu can't recognize the shape of other variants. Our once-a-year flu vaccines trigger production of antibodies to the head of the HA protein, which reaches out from the surface of the virus like a bunch of tiny mushrooms growing on a roughly ball-shaped virus. These antibodies work by blocking the HA protein from binding to host cells. But like the measles virus, flu virus HA proteins mutate all the time,
causing slight changes in their structure while still retaining their ability to infect us. And the fact that the structure is constantly changing means the same antibodies can't recognize the HA molecules on different strains of flu from one year to the next. A truly universal flu vaccine, a one-time vaccine that would be effective across all strains, is widely considered the holy grail of vaccine research. One big piece of the puzzle is the stem of the mushroom-shaped HA protein. Unlike the rapidly changing head, the stem remains largely unchanged from year to year. If only our antibodies could reach it, because that mushroom head seems to get in the way. In researching the H1N1 pandemic of 2009, scientists found something unexpected. They realized that people who got the 2009 version of the flu shot made more antibodies than they would have predicted to the HA mushroom stems. And surprisingly, those antibodies were able to recognize and immobilize several strains and subtypes of the flu. It turns out that the particular strain of H1N1 circulating that year had a head that was about 30% different from previous strains, which had led scientists to hypothesize that being exposed to HA proteins with different kinds of head structures somehow redirects the body's immune response to make antibodies that bind to the stems. So developing vaccines that target the stems of HA has since been a major focus of universal vaccine efforts. One approach is a vaccine that targets the HA stem in combination with NA, which has shown to protect against a lethal strain of flu in mice. Another promising approach uses antibodies from llamas. Turns out, llamas produce antibodies that are smaller than ours, which allows them to squeeze past the HA head and bind to the stem. This approach also proved successful in mice. But the candidate furthest along in this quest for a universal shot is called M001, and it's slightly different. It targets very short segments of the HA protein that are known not to change, and it's making its way through clinical trials. Ultimately, the process behind creating a universal flu vaccine could end up being a lot like how we made the measles vaccine. It's just that the flu makes things far more difficult and hides the parts we can target really well. Meanwhile, we'll stay thankful for our lifelong immunity to measles and keep getting those annual flu shots. They're still a lot nicer than the flu.
What I got from that video is that llamas are the answer to life, the universe, and everything. Well, that and that you don't need a booster shot for everything because not all viruses mutate as fast as the flu. But you know what else has mutated a lot over time? STEM learning tools. And that is where today's video sponsor, Brilliant, comes in. Watching videos and reading text is a great way to learn new science every day, but to take your comprehension to the next level, you need to actually do it. And today's sponsor, Brilliant, provides an opportunity for just that. They're a fully interactive online STEM learning platform that helps you learn science by doing. Like with their course Scientific Thinking, where you can learn more about the world around you by solving puzzles with science. To check them out, visit the link in the description or visit brilliant.org/SciShow. And if you're one of the first 200 people to click on the link in the description, you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. And checking them out also helps us, so thanks. We couldn't make this video without your support, but let's be honest, the real MVP is the measles shot. And not only because you don't need a booster, but because it can help with other sicknesses too. Here's what I mean by that.
All right, so hopefully it's not too shocking to hear that the measles vaccine saves lives. Before widespread measles vaccinations were a thing, the measles virus caused over 4 million deaths a year. Thankfully, since measles vaccines started making their rounds more than 50 years ago, there's been a decline in childhood mortality. A massive decline. Deaths of children have dropped by up to 90% in lower-income countries. And that's a lot more than you'd expect if the measles vaccine just prevented deaths from the disease itself. But it turns out vaccinated kids are also not dying from other illnesses that occur as secondary infections or within a few years. And that's because measles messes with your immune system in a unique way, leaving you susceptible to illnesses you were previously immune to. Yeah, the measles virus is that nasty. Your immune system works really hard to keep you protected from illnesses, and one way it does that is with your adaptive immune system, basically a whole army of cells that can learn from pathogens. Among the most important weapons in the adaptive immune system are lymphocytes, special white blood cells that can remember what's tried to take you down before, so next time it comes around, your body is ready. For example, T cells are a type of lymphocyte, and they have the essential task of finding unhealthy or infected cells and destroying them. There are also B cells, which bind to intruders, and alongside T cells help create antibodies during an infection. And while they're fighting what ails you, B and T cells also create memory cells. These are clones of the specific B and T cells which successfully bound to the pathogen, and they remain after an infection, holding on to information about each threat the body has been exposed to. Basically, they create an immune system memory bank of the bad guys you've battled off. We know from studies in both macaque monkeys and humans that the measles virus attacks and kills B and T lymphocytes, so it might literally wipe out part or all of your immune system's memory bank. And although white blood cell counts in your blood return to normal levels after a few weeks, it's likely these replacement B and T lymphocytes are measles specific. So your immune system might successfully beat the measles virus and create a lifelong immunity to it, but it could also stop remembering a lot of what it knew beforehand. Initially, it was thought that this immune amnesia effect only lasted for the weeks immediately following the infection. And that might make sense if the virus doesn't wipe out your entire clone army, but a growing body of research suggests it lasts way longer than that. Data on childhood health that's been collected worldwide since measles vaccines first became widespread suggests the virus disables immune memory for 2 to 3 years. In one study, researchers looked at the medical history of over 2,000 measles patients compared to children who never caught the measles. Their work showed that children who once had measles were diagnosed with more infections and were given more anti-infection prescriptions than the measles-free population for up to 5 years after recovering from the measles. To put it not so lightly, someone who survives a bout of measles could become infected with a life-threatening disease years later that they would have otherwise fought off easily. And scientists are still trying to figure out the exact mechanisms for this. Some studies suggest that the live measles vaccine itself helps by directly enhancing your immune response. You see, in addition to B and T cells that take on intruders and remember past wrongs, there are other immune cells which use non-specific defenses against foreign cells in the body, like the ones that are a part of what's called your innate immune system. And the measles vaccine might make these innate immune cells more responsive when they re-encounter familiar pathogens in a way that's totally unrelated to antibodies, something referred to as trained immunity. But other research suggests the measles vaccine may simply prevent the immune amnesia effect from happening, by stopping the measles infection in the first place, and therefore preventing it from killing off your memory cells. But there are other questions about all this too, like how much immune memory is erased by the virus. For example, if you get the measles after other childhood vaccines, does it essentially wipe them out? Right now, we just don't know, though there are doctors trying to develop tests that can figure out what protections you've lost. Because of these and other unanswered questions about measles infections, the best bet is to protect everyone from getting measles to begin with. Seriously, get vaccinated. When enough people get vaccinated for infectious diseases like measles, it protects everyone, not just those who got the shot. Herd immunity ensures there isn't a large enough susceptible population to continue the spread. And that protects people who can't be vaccinated and other vulnerable individuals, like babies or people with compromised immune systems. But if you really need another reason to get the measles vaccine, here it is. You're not just protecting yourself and others around you from the measles. You're also helping to keep your immune system in good working order so it can protect you from all sorts of other illnesses. Because nobody wants a forgetful immune system.
Herd immunity can save lives, but it only works if enough people get vaccinated. And for the average healthy person, the pain in your arm or slight discomfort afterward are the biggest downsides of getting vaccinated. That's peanuts compared to the life-saving upsides, especially because one vaccine can protect you from disease in multiple ways. So if the measles vaccine can protect you from other diseases, what kinds of other conditions could we use a vaccine for?
Measles, mumps, and polio. These are things that we can prevent with a vaccine, but scientists are looking to add a surprising entry to that list: type 1 diabetes, which unlike the others is not an infectious disease. You can't share a sugar-free soda with your diabetic friend and suddenly lose your ability to produce insulin. It just doesn't work like that. And usually, infectious diseases are the ones that we can target with vaccines. So how would a diabetes vaccine even work? Well, type 1 diabetes, or T1D for short, is a chronic, irreversible condition, typically diagnosed in children, where certain people's bodies do not make the insulin they need to control sugar in their bloodstream. And that's different from type 2 diabetes, where patients' bodies typically become resistant to insulin, so it can't effectively manage blood sugar levels. In type 1, they just don't make it in the first place. Their immune system has turned on the rest of their body and destroyed the cells in their pancreas responsible for making insulin. For a long time, the trigger for this destruction has been a big question mark. In recent years, scientists have identified genetic risk factors that increase a person's risk for T1D, but these factors can't cause the disease alone, nor can they explain all the weird things public health scientists have found when studying T1D, like the fact that there are certain times of year where more people get diagnosed with this chronic disease than other times, not something usually chalked up to genetics. So with genetic factors failing to explain the full picture, scientists have looked to the environment for additional causes. They've investigated links to vitamin deficiency, potential dietary causes, and even pancreatic toxins. But one of the most compelling explanations has to do with viruses. Specifically, that a class of viruses called enteroviruses, which typically infect your GI tract, could induce T1D. It's thought that they could somehow cause an immune response that makes the body destroy those insulin-producing cells. And this could be the key to a T1D vaccine, because while T1D is not infectious, viruses are. And if these viruses induce T1D, it could open the door to using vaccines to grant immunity to those viruses, which in turn could prevent the development of T1D. Over the last 50 years, several studies have been able to show a causal connection between enteroviral infections and the induction of T1D, at least in mice. But this connection has been much harder to show in humans, partly because human subjects are just more difficult to study. In order to prove that enteroviruses cause T1D, you have to demonstrate that a group of infants who were genetically predisposed to T1D were also infected with enterovirus. That's before they were diagnosed with T1D. And of course, we can't infect human babies with viruses. So instead, you have to wait until the babies naturally get infected, which is difficult because most enteroviruses don't cause symptoms. Parents don't generally show up at the doctor when their baby doesn't seem sick. Neither do doctors usually think to look for a virus that's not doing anything. Instead, you have to routinely collect samples from babies' poop and check them for enterovirus genes. But as researchers soon discovered, enterovirus genes can't always be found during an infection. You need to check a bunch of times to catch them. So in 2017, after a couple successful studies, several more failed ones, and a whole lot of baby poop, the largest study to date settled the score with two important findings. First, it showed that babies who are genetically susceptible to T1D also have higher rates of enterovirus infection. And second, it found that months after those infections, the T1D predisposed babies started producing certain autoimmune cells, which are known to attack the pancreas and cause T1D. That's a pretty strong case. And now that a strong connection has been shown in multiple studies, it opens the door to vaccine research to prevent these infections. That research has already begun. One vaccine being studied in mice targets a specific enterovirus called CVB. In a small study published in 2018, researchers administered the vaccine to 7 mice carrying the genetic risk factors for T1D, and all 7 were protected from developing it. News reports have claimed that this CVB vaccine is set to enter human clinical trials soon, but it could be years before they start the study or have results. But that said, a group of scientists in Finland had the idea to try a shortcut. See, polio is an enterovirus, and we already have a vaccine for it that we know is safe and effective. They published a study in 2018 which looked at whether the poliovirus vaccine could prevent T1D, but unfortunately they found it had no protective effect. So thus far, we don't have an anti-diabetes vaccine that works in humans, but the CVB vaccine could work out, and maybe someday we'll be able to look at type 1 diabetes as a disease of the past.
So although we do not have a diabetes vaccine yet, it sounds like researchers are at least working on it. For now, alas, we can only tell you about the past. So if you would like to learn more about vaccine history, you can check out a previous SciShow video that is all about the women who conquered whooping cough. Thanks for watching.